Hey, this is Mrs. Smeckens. And while we've been working on reading voice and thinking voice, we're starting to apply it in this lesson series to questioning. So our thinking voice doesn't just talk to us in comments, in connections, in visualizations. It also can whisper in the form of questions. In the last lesson, we looked at how we should actually be listening for pre-reading questions. Remember, we learned about stealing information from text features with our reading voice and then thinking about them in terms of what do we wonder? What do we want to know? What do we want to learn more about? Okay, and that whole notion was kind of tied to the notion of the Mrs. Linder silhouette head. Look at your screen here for a second. See my little guy with the mask on, right? Because we were information thieves. And we're stealing information. Where do we get those details? We get the information before we start reading from all the text features. And as we then generate questions, it goes inside the head, right? Because those are my thoughts. I got these details from the text and I'm generating questions. Okay, but one of the things we need to recognize is that readers don't just ask questions before they read. They also ask questions while they read. That's what this lesson is about. I want to teach you another type of question. I want to teach you about the wondering that you might have. As you're reading and collecting information, you start to wonder about that. You start to have questions, more questions. Beyond the questions you started with, you generate more new questions. Now, I got a lot more to say, but let me start with, what do we do all this questioning for? What is the purpose? The value of questioning is it creates a reading purpose. It gives you, the reader, an engagement factor. You lean in, you want to know more. Even if you're like, I don't really care about this topic, for a short little bit while reading this, you're reading it, you're taking in details, and what do you wonder about? You guys, it gives you a reading purpose. Right now you have a reason to read. Why are you reading? To figure out your answers, to find answers to your own questions. This is what readers do. They preview and generate before reading questions, and they continue to wonder and question while they're reading. Okay, so here's how it would look if we were going back to our silhouette head. If this is before reading, okay, then during reading, look, no mask, all right, I'm not being an information thief anymore. Now I'm just reading the sentences and paragraphs. And I start to collect more information. But as I collect those details, I realize I have another new question. Collect some more details. And wait a minute, what about, how come, why did? This is how reading works. We generate questions based on details we take in. Okay, so the big question then becomes, how do I do that, Mrs. Smeckens? I barely was having questions before I read. Now I know the text features help me generate questions. How do I generate questions during reading when there's no text features? Now I'm just reading the paragraphs. Okay, fair. Here's the secret. What you have to realize is the same most important information that we learned about in the last series, that the most important information is what you write your summary about, the most important key details. The same most important information that you summarize is what you're questioning during reading. Yeah, so if it's fiction, literature, it's your story elements. You wonder about the setting. You wonder about the character. Why did he do that? How does he feel about that? What's he going to do next? Predicting his choices. You wonder about the problem. Why did they do it that way? What if they did this as the solution? Predicting what you think that they're going to do to solve the problem. And then again, the power and impact of the solution. What are your questions regarding that? What if they would have solved it this way? The same story elements that drive your reading of most important information will be what spur your questions. So as you're taking in these details, taking note of these details, they are what give you during reading questions. You don't have during reading questions on other things. You have it on the details you're noting, the most important information. That's what gives it to you. But that was literature, right? Fiction. You've got to be able to do this with nonfiction as well. So when we look at the idea of passage on rocks and minerals, passage on pilgrims, passage on a historical event, a passage on a body system, okay? Well, if there are people involved, what do we know about the who, whether it's an individual or it's a group, like a Native American tribe? If it's a subject matter, like a digestive system or the rock and a mineral or something like that, then okay, now it's what do you know? What do you want to know? What are you questioning? And so it's taking those details and start to wonder, well, what about the who? Tell me more about the where, the when, the why, the how. All of these important details that you're noticing that would be part of a summary, don't just take them in. Don't just passively be a reader and take it in. Wonder about it. Lean in and pause. Read a couple details about the character, about the subject, about the place it's happening. Take in a few details and then pause and listen. Are you having any questions? What would you want to know more about? What is a little confusing? What is not clear? What's your next question? Do you have a prediction? That's how it works. All right. And another facet, particularly in nonfiction, that will help generate questions is when you're coming across those sentences and paragraphs and there are vocabulary words in them, whether they're bold or not. They're like, ooh, that's an important word. Why is it important? What does it do? How does it work? What other things does it relate to? So the idea that key words would also be something that you're looking for in your reading voice and then asking questions about with your thinking voice. These are the things that you wonder about. Let me add that to our anchor chart. So during reading, when you're collecting details with your reading voice about these things, you also need to pause and question them. Why? When? How come? Where? Ask these kinds of questions. Okay, so as we kind of get ready to practice this a little bit, I want to remind you of a lesson skill we learned a while back. And it was the difference between taking notes and annotating. Do you remember that? And the idea that taking notes is kind of what we did in the last lesson where I put the thoughts on the silhouette head. Okay, and so we're lifting the details and we're putting our thoughts outside of the text that we were reading. But annotation is when you write in the margin and you put your thoughts in the text. Okay, I want us to use annotation in this lesson. All right, and remember, annotation means not only do you highlight something, but you have to put a note. Put a note, your thinking voice thought, or in this case, your thinking voice question goes in the margin. What are you wondering? That goes in the margin. Okay, and we even called it YLighting. You couldn't just underline or highlight a word. You couldn't do that. You had to also add in, what are you thinking? In this case, what are you wondering? What is your question? So don't just put a question mark in the margin. Write out your question, 2 or 3 words, abbreviate it, but write out your question because it's not helpful to have question marks if you don't know what they represent. So you want to actually write out those questions. All right, so as we kind of connect all the dots here, what I'm about to do is generate questions while reading. I'm going to do it first. I'll do it in front of you. And I'm going to use this annotation method. So I'm going to actually do it in the text, okay? And before I show you the text, let's again recognize that what we're doing is making tracks in the snow. Remember that? Remember tracks in the snow, footprints on the pool deck? Well, we can jot down our thoughts, we can jot down our connections, we can jot down our visualizations, but we can also and should also jot down or track our questions. What do you wonder? What is confusing? That's what we write down. So as you're going line by line, it's like footprint by footprint. And if you're like, ooh, that caused me to wonder about, that caused me to think about, I'm now thinking this. And it's not just a thought, but a question, a prediction. I want you to actually write it down. Okay, so I'm going to do it first, and I'm going to use the passage that I referenced in the last lesson. Remember the librarian from New York who didn't like Goodnight Moon, and so it wasn't her favorite book, and so it didn't make the best book list or something. Okay, so on the screen, I have what we did in the last lesson. We looked at all these text features. We never actually read the article. We just looked at text features, okay? And we generated these questions. Why does she hate the book? Why does she have so much power that people listen to her? Did she ever like the book before, she died? And just, why were kids not allowed in libraries? I don't get it. What's going on? And so these were the questions that we generated after looking at all the text features. Okay, so now here's the first part of that article. And I am going to model for you. I'm going to show you how Mrs. Smeckens is going to generate new additional questions. All right, so those questions I've already got as my pre-reading, stealing, information thief questions. All right, but now I'm going to model for you how I generate more new questions. So you follow along on the screen. Whoops, you follow along on the screen, and I will go ahead and start to read and just tell you the thoughts that I'm having. Okay? All right, here we go. On January 13th, the New York Public Library revealed its list of the 10 most checked out books of all time. The list largely consists of children's books. You've probably read at least one. There's Snowy Day, The Cat in the Hat. Each has been checked out nearly 500 times. There's Very Hungry Caterpillar and Where the Wild Things Are. So it made the most checked out list, and I recognize some of those titles, and I could make a note of that. I could say, ooh, I like that. I remember my grandma read that to me. I could put thoughts, connections like that, but I'm supposed to be thinking about questions in particular. And my first question is, what's the number one book? So if it's been checked out at least 500 times, or nearly 500,000 times, and it says the 10 most, it mentions them, but I'm going to underline which is the number one book. What title is the number one? So I'm just writing down number one book, question mark. That's what I'm writing down. Okay, put the question mark, because that helps you know it's not just a thought, it's a question, a unique type of thought. Okay, and that's a new question. It's not one that I had during pre-reading. So I'm writing down new questions, things I wonder about as I take in details. All right, let me keep going. There's also one famous book missing from the list, Margaret Wise Brown, Goodnight Moon. Okay, so I know I wondered why before I'm reading, but I'm just going to mark it again. Why is that book missing? So I'm just going to underline book missing, Goodnight Moon, why? And again, put the question mark. Why is it missing? Couple keywords, and I'm wondering this, and I'm expecting that I'll get an answer at some point. All right, so we keep going. You remember the Great Green Room, the telephone, the balloon, the painting of the cow jumping over the moon. Okay, let's go on to the third paragraph. The book's absence from the most read list is so glaring, the library felt a need to explain why it's missing. Its absence is so glaring, they need to explain why it's missing. Okay, I'm having a thought. There are only 10 books on this list, so there are a whole lot of other books absent. Why is this book so glaring? What is it about this book that they feel they need to explain it? Why this book's so important? What about other books? What's the big deal with this book? So I'm just jotting down why this important, question mark, other books, question mark. See what I'm doing? This is what readers do, okay? They not only generate questions before they read to give them a reading purpose so they lean in, okay? But it also gets them thinking while reading about additional questions. Stay engaged. This is also why you can't just look at words and call it reading, all right? You've got to be wondering about what you're reading. Okay, now, before I go on, let me kind of back up for a minute and add something to our instruction here. And that is that what you just saw me do was track, right? Like tracks in the snow, annotate, YLight. You saw me read, and I'd underline, and I'd put my thoughts and my questions, okay? But readers don't just annotate their questions. They also, as they're reading, are aware of the whole point of reading. The whole point of reading and collecting details and having thoughts is to get it, to understand the information, to comprehend. In other words, you've got to be looking for your answers, people. You got to be looking for your answers. Yes, so while reading and having thoughts, new questions, then I also want you to be reading and recognizing when, hey, that answers one of our questions, and mark it down. Yeah, we got to mark our answers too. Now, remember, questions, I mark with a question mark, a couple keywords in the margin and a question mark. Answers, I mark with an A. I put an A in a circle, so I know that's an answer to a question. And then I usually put a word or two next to it so I remember which question it's answering. Okay, so that idea of an A with a circle versus a question mark. Don't just put an A because you don't know what it's an answer to. That's not helpful. All right, just like you don't put a question mark and think we're good. No, what's the question you're having? What thought are you having? Okay, so we want to track questions and answers. Okay, no, wait, watch this. We read the text, we preview the text and we generate questions, right? From looking at text features, we generate questions. So this image here on your screen, we looked at those text details, text features, and we got this question. Okay, then we actually started to read, all right? And this lesson is about, hey, as you start to read, hopefully you'll also generate more new questions. Yes, that's what we want. Stay engaged. But in terms of answers, as you collect several details, sometimes what your reading voice says will be details that help you figure out an answer to one of those questions that you've already had. You start to put details together and you're answering your own questions. You guys, this is what keeps you moving forward in the text. Questions with answers and more questions and more answers. This is what keeps us leaning in. This is the idea of readers getting it, understanding, comprehending, making inferences. So I'm going to add this to our chart over top the other one, because it's not just about looking at details and having questions. It's about then putting the details together to answer your own questions. This is what readers do. All right, so I'm going to go back to my Goodnight Moon passage, because so far the only thing I modeled for you was how I was reading and generating more new questions. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back now, and I want to model how I also am aware with my thinking voice of when I come across an answer. Okay, so here I go, and I'll just start right back at the top. Okay, on January 13th, the New York Public Library revealed its list of the 10 most checked out books of all time. The list largely consists of children's books. Snowy Day, Cat in the Hat, Hungry Caterpillar, Where the Wild Things Are. Okay, there's also one famous children's book missing from the list, Goodnight Moon. You remember, da-da-da-da. Okay, so far I had questions. I don't think I've come across an answer to either of those questions or any of my previous questions. Okay, all right, so now I'll jump to the third paragraph. The book's absence from the most read list is so glaring the library felt a need to explain why it's missing. Fourth paragraph. While children and their parents have loved the bedtime story for years, librarian Anne Carroll Moore hated it. Moore not only ran the children's section of the library for 35 years, she actually invented it. Moore's influence was so great, her opinion kept the book off the shelf for tens of years. Wait a minute. Why does she hate the book? Why is it missing from the list? Let's go back and let me remind you of some of our pre-reading questions. And one of them was, why does she have so much power? So she didn't like the book. Who cares? Yeah, but people were listening to her. Why? What's the big deal? You guys, because she ran the children's section. She invented the children weren't in libraries. She invented the children's section. She ran it for 35 years. Well, that's why she has so much power, so much influence. Her opinion was powerful. I'm getting an answer to my question from the pre-read, the preview. So what am I going to do? Underline those words, and I put an A with a circle, and I just write this idea of power, because that's an answer to the why she has so much power question that I generated. So I just put a keyword next to the A. I know that's an answer. I know that's a new question. See the difference? This is what readers do. Let's do one more paragraph. Goodnight Moon first came out in 1947, but Moore hated the book so much the library didn't carry it until 1972. Oops, let me put that up on the screen for you. Okay, top of the second column. The library explained that the time that it wasn't on the shelves bumped the book off the top 10 list for now. Whoa, that's an answer. See, if you have questions and don't remember your questions, you're not going to recognize that's an answer. You've got to be not only generating questions, but remembering them and being engaged, looking for answers. I remember asking, why was the book missing? Well, it's because she hated it. She was so influential, and she didn't even put it in the library for years. So look, the time it wasn't even on the shelves, it kept it off the list. It wasn't being checked out, so it can't make the most checked out list. That is an answer. That is an answer to the question of why it's off the list. Okay, but now look at this. I could write why not on list. That's the answer. But when it's right next to the question, sometimes I'll just do this. Sometimes I'll just put an arrow to connect answer and question together. Yeah, that's what readers do. Yeah, I mean, when it's on a different page, if you can, you can. But when I can, be faster, right? Just be efficient. All right, you guys, what we're learning to do in this lesson is figure out not only how to have pre-reading questions, but to have during reading questions. and how to be juggling answers for both of these sets of questions throughout the entire reading process. Yeah, again, if you are just doing the reading, and you're not having any of these thoughts, this is why you don't get it, you guys. This is why it doesn't make sense and you don't get it. All right, try it with me. Try it with me on this next one. Remember the Steve Jobs gave the graduation speech at Stanford? Okay, and in the last lesson, we did this together where we just looked at all these text features and collected them and then generated questions like what was the topic he spoke about? Did he talk about tech in his speech? Remember he said, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. When we know that from the subheads over here. And he said something about connecting dots, and we were like, what's a dot? What does he mean by dots? Are they people? Are they events? Are they careers? You know, he was going to talk about love and loss. Okay, so what's he going to say that's different? He was going to talk about death, like how to cheat death, or like how to live every day is your last day. What do we mean? And remember at very end, you know, the stay hungry, stay foolish. We were like, where'd that come from? What does that mean? What does he talk about that elsewhere? Okay, so those are my pre-reading questions. Here's the thing you have to remember. You have to tuck those away, but not so far away that you aren't looking for answers to those while you start to read and generate more new questions. Do you see? This is why I like writing my questions down. I like writing down my questions in a pre-read. I like writing down my questions during reading, because then when I come across an answer, I'm like, yeah, that goes with that. So we don't just passively read. We've got to be engaged. We've got to take some notes. All right, so I just had the beginning of this article. And again, let's do it together, but I'm going to show you this idea of underlining and adding new questions, or underlining and noting answers. All right, so let me zoom in here, and this is just the editor's note at the beginning. Let's just read that paragraph. Read it silently. What questions are you having? How do you get so creative? How do you get so brilliant? What college did he go to? Yeah. And what words? You know, I mean, we have this idea that he was a pioneer. He's a chief executive officer. He invented this and that and da-da-da. So these keywords, how to get so creative. Where to go to school. Remember, put question marks next to those. Okay? Do we get any answers? Look at the last sentence in that paragraph. Jobs offered his insight into how to lead a successful life. Look, one of our pre-reading questions was, what topic was he going to talk to the grads about? You have to remember or write down your questions. Otherwise, you don't recognize when you got an answer. That's an answer. Jobs offered his insight into a successful life. I'm putting an A with a circle because that's an answer. And I'm just going to write the word topic because it answers the what was the topic question. So I just put a keyword to remind myself of which question it goes to. Yeah, this is what readers do. You guys, we not only take notes and think about pre-reading questions, but also during reading questions. And the whole point of reading is to make sure we're trying to figure out what the whole thing means, get answers to our questions. So we want to track questions. We want to track answers. This is how readers work. This is what they do. Okay, if you were in Mrs. Smecken's class, here's what your task would be. I would ask you to go back to that fast food article. And if you didn't do it in the last lesson, you're going to do it now. But if you remember, I asked you to look at that article, and I wanted you to generate a list of pre-reading questions. I gave you a silhouette head, and I just wanted you to look at the text features, steal information, and generate questions. And I told you, don't read the article. Well, now you're going to read the article. Now, if you didn't do that previous task, no problem, because when you read this article, I've already done the task of collecting, stealing information from text features, and generating questions. So you can use mine or you can use your own. My pre-reading questions were, how is it possible to have fast food part of a healthy diet? How do you have smaller portions when value meals are so big? How can you eat out and be healthy at the same time? Are potatoes the worst food for us in terms of bad eating? So those are my 4 pre-reading questions. You can use those and look for answers, okay? Or use your own pre-reading questions and look for answers. But readers also wonder, I want you generating new questions. While you read this 2-page article, I want you YLighting, underlining, and jotting down any new questions that you have. Use the question mark. all right? Any new questions, it's 2 pages, okay? And I want you on the lookout for answers to the pre-reading questions, preview questions, and the during reading questions. And any answer you underline and you put an A, right? And you mark it, or you draw a line, A with an arrow to point to a question and answer and put them together. This is what readers do. If you were in Mrs. Meccan's class, that's what we'd be doing, but your teacher might have a better idea.